In this video I'm going to give you my take on the contrast paints and whether or not it's worth it to buy them 2 months after the big hype. Welcome back, owners of fine luxury plastic toy soldiers. When Games Workshop released their new contrast paints 2 months ago, it seemed like everyone was going completely bonkers over it. Even the pre-orders were sold out. Wait, is that how pre-orders work? Here's my report about what I tried so far, what I have seen others do with the paints, and my general report on these colors after 2 months of contrast craziness. The moment I heard what contrast paints were supposed to do, I knew that they probably were not going to be for me, and after I tried them out, the notion only got solidified. I wasn't going to make a video on them because I knew I didn't want to buy the colors, and I didn't also want to make a video just for the views, and oh boy, there were a lot of views. But you guys are still asking me what I think of them during the streams and in private messages, so I will give you my thorough analysis of the paints. Note that I'll be looking at this through my own experience and through what I'm looking for in paints in general, as well as from the perspective of a miniature painting teacher who tries to keep in mind what it can do for beginners. I'll try to look at all possible applications that this paint can have and back up my conclusions with as many arguments and explanations as I can. Now, even though I knew that these paints would do next to nothing for me, I do appreciate what these paints can do for others. They can drastically speed up the painting process of models that are meant to be for the gaming table.
Aren't they meant to be painted?
These results are more than okay for gaming pieces and frankly look better than most of the stuff that people do if they just don't want to paint but have to so they can play with their minis. And therefore I think this is a good product apart from the usual quirks that characterizes Games Workshop products, like being overpriced and in the case of all colors the absolute garbage containers. Oh, come on! Contrast paints do what they're supposed to do and what they were initially advertised as. They get your armies painted for gaming. I can see them working especially well for organic miniatures like poxwalkers or figures for games like The Others 7 Sins, for example. I will add up front that I only got the medium and a few shades to try at home because, like I said, I did not want to buy an excessive amount of these paints just for a review and then never use them again. I got the red, for example, because I thought it might be good for blood and gore effects. And I got the yellow because I feel like it's a really intense contrast that you can create with it. However, I was lucky enough to be able to try all of the shades at a friend's place, and I got about 3 hours of testing time that way. Shout out to Thomas, Brofist. That was super cringy. Now, the idea behind this video is to think of applications beyond painting miniatures quickly for the table and whether or not it's worth it to get the contrast paints for different purposes than that. The questions I was trying to answer for myself were: are they doing what they were advertised to do? Are they behaving consistently across the range, or is there inconsistencies? How do they behave at different dilution levels? And how do they behave over already existing paint? So I have been using the colors to apply a base coat where I wanted to achieve the advertised effect of having shades and highlights without a lot of extra work. And it kind of worked, but I always felt compelled to add a highlight color like white to invest some extra work on these edges. And it seems like I wasn't the only one with that urge, as I've found a couple of other videos that did exactly the same, even if they were originally advertised as only using contrast paints. Using white, for example, because the highlights get obscured and are not really intense enough to give enough contrast to look good on the table. At that point, I was asking myself, do you really need to buy a new range of colors just for having glorified base coats? Because if the one coat application doesn't properly work and the contrast is not really that intense, what's the purpose of it?
Even when you paint just one coat, it makes blending, shading and highlighting straightforward.
My experience exploring the second question that I had which was whether or not they are behaving consistently across the range, was definitely yielding mixed results. Look, this is advertised as a solution to get your miniatures on the table quickly, and that includes not having to try and test a lot of things before you apply them, which can come back to bite you since they clearly are inconsistent. The yellows behaved a lot different from the blues, and even though that is probably true for a lot of painting ranges, colors of more similar intensity like green and blue also showed significant differences in coverage. So adding the same amount of medium resulted in even more variation, which can be confusing to beginners. How about other applications for this paint? One thing I could see myself doing is using it as a glaze color, applying more controlled layers to create transitions by slowly shading down a brighter color. Obviously you cannot highlight with them. In fact, Andy Wardle did that on this model with an airbrush, which is why I also tested that in my session, and yes, it worked better shooting those contrast paints through an airbrush because the layer was covering more equally and consistently than doing, the same with a brush. But I can do that with any color, and for most colors to do that I don't even need an airbrush. For the contrast paints, to get a good consistency, good coverage, good even coverage, you need an airbrush. And while they work through an airbrush as shades, I'm going to show you in an example in a bit that these colors are not the go-to colors for detailed glazing. So what about using them as washes? Thinned down, they could work as a wash to create shadows and contrast, but I already have washes. Buttup Black, for example, and Devil Mud I use extensively, and I already have a lot of other color shades from the Games Workshop range that I use and that do the job. So another thing that I found potentially useful was that with the right dilution, which seemingly contradicts what I said earlier, but you have to find that right consistency at the right amount of medium, which means they are eventually reaching a very translucent consistency, and we're talking very, very translucent, which at that point it makes it almost useless for anything else. It makes them candidates for filters, which means to intensify colors or tint gradients a certain way. But for that I have inks that do exactly the same at a lot less hassle and preparation to find the right consistency. Using the paint, I remembered people saying that they felt very reminiscent of how something like PVA glue applies. And while I don't think they actually contain PVA glue, there is a lot of people who manage to create the exact same properties that contrast paints have by mixing different products together. You actually get a few really decent videos on that if you look around. So if you are in the hobby for a while, you might even have a lot of these components at home and create your own contrast paints. The problem with these paints is unless you use them for what they have been designed for, and even that can be replicated without having to actually buy the colors, you don't need them. Especially if you already have a wide range of colors and technical paints in your arsenal. I can do anything I might be using them for with things I already have, and why would I exchange a product I already have experience with and know how to work with for something I need to get used to again, and frankly they're not exactly cheap and still come in these bad pots. And this is where I think the campaign went wrong. They tried to make the paints more than what they are. They were trying to tell you that you need these paints to achieve certain things which we are able to achieve without them since forever. And they tried to support that notion by inviting pro painters to try the colors. Okay, let's see. Nah, that's not it. Oh my god, no! Now, I know this has been explained in other videos, but let me sum up my thoughts on that in a few words and give you a few examples why I think this still matters and how it supports my points. Looking at what painters that have decades of experience in brush control and applying paints to models can do using contrast paints does not mean anyone and everyone will get the same results because of these colors. Pro painters will get these results regardless of the paints being contrast paints, not because of contrast paints. Let me give you an example. Darren Latham posted this way to do non-metallic metal gold on his Twitter, and it feels like it got a new validation to mention this because it got reposted by the Warhammer community team as an official post. A lot of the contrast paints, when applied thin and as glazes to create transitions, look very rough and flaky, and you have to wrestle with having the pigments stay where you want them to go, and you constantly have to play around with how much medium you need and so on. Anyone would tell you that all of this is not something to look for in paints. Legions of painters have been trying to find ways to avoid exactly that, and now we're praising it. Looking at all the additional steps that this approach takes is an additional point that we can't just brush under the rug. I couldn't say it better than Miniatures Den did here in this clip.
I definitely suggest contrast paints to anybody who wants to achieve a high quality paint job, especially non-metallic, because in only 25 steps you can achieve exactly what anybody else can achieve in 3 using normal paints.
Putting Darren's usual results with non-metallic gold next to the result with contrast paints reveals that traditional painting will always look better in a setting like this. Just ask Games Workshop which of the two would win over the other at a Golden Demon competition. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what pro painters can do with the paints. An experienced painter can use any color to get decent results because they can usually identify workarounds to any quirk the paint might have. What matters is what someone that is starting out can do with them, or someone that doesn't have the time that pro painters can put in, and whether or not it is helpful to them to achieve their painting goals quicker. Because you will certainly not achieve better results with it. If you're out to use these paints to improve your painting and your results, they are probably not the colors for you, because there's other easier to use options for almost anything in that department. One small thing before we come to the conclusion here. My website went live a while ago and people requested an index of my videos going from basic topics to more advanced tutorials and eventually all the Patreon content as well. All of this makes my videos easy to navigate. And you can find videos too about every topic there is in miniature painting. You can also find an online store where you can get my busts and also the painting guides if you don't want to join the Patreon. And of course there's a link where you can buy the merch, such as the Major League Painting t-shirts, the Pro Painter logo, and you can also don the logo of your favorite painting series. Would I still be painting if there was only contrast paints around? Probably, but I would want someone to invent an opaque white so I had something to apply additional highlights with. These colors are definitely not revolutionizing the painting landscape, because they can't replicate anything in a convincing way other than speeding up your base coating and leaving you with a basic notion of shades and highlights, and even that can be done with cheaper and existing do-it-yourself approaches. Have I missed anything in the summary? How have these paints helped you so far? Can you relate to any of my experiences, or have you experienced the exact opposite? Have you found a use for them that changed your painting dramatically? Let me know in the comments, and if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to get notified when I upload something. Thanks for watching, stay creative, and I'll see you next video. Being overpriced and, in the case of all colors, the absolute garbage. The problem...